was really young, I slept in the same bedroom as my parents. My bed was sideways, pressed against the bottom of their bed, with my dad sleeping on the left and my mom on the right. I still remember every detail like it happened yesterday. I woke up in the dead of night and looked over at the wall, and there were three perfect shadows. A man in the middle and two kids, one on either side of them, all holding hands. The man let go of one of the hands and started waving to me, making a motion like he was beckoning me to come over. There were no details to the figures, no faces, just perfect shadows. I walked over to my mom's side of the bed and woke her up crying, saying the shadow people were trying to make me go with them. She flicked a lamp on and they were gone. When I was in middle school, my bedroom was upstairs in the front of the house and faced the street, across which were a row of houses. At night when I couldn't sleep, I would just stare out the window. Sometimes when I looked, there was a really old man in one of the driveways. He had a walking cane and would use it to bat the chestnuts that fell out of his driveway. He just did it endlessly and always in the wee hours of the morning, out there silently hitting these chestnuts and sending them rolling into the street. There were thousands of them, so he wasn't even making a dent. I never once saw him in the daytime. Came to find out from the neighbors that the house had been empty for a very long time, and nobody lived there.
One afternoon I was at work. I walked past a room with a window in the door and automatically glanced in the window. There was a woman standing in the room, except there were only 3 people in the building and the other 2 were in the office behind me. I took a couple steps, realized what I had just seen, and backed up quickly, but by the time I got back to the window, the room was empty. There was only one door, and when I opened it, the room was empty. At the same building, a coworker was telling me that she was in the office, right around the corner from that same room. She could unsee the door, but she could see the shadow of the door on the floor as it slowly opened and closed. She was the only one in the building at the time, and she refused to check. I arrived about an hour later, and she asked me to check the door, and it was still locked. I worked there about 3 years, and every single one of us had stories. We heard voices in empty rooms. Once we were sitting in the office, and we heard somebody breathing in an empty corner. It was common to be in one of the rooms and think somebody had just walked into the room, only to look up and find that the room was empty except for you. I had one manager who scoffed at all of our stories. She did not believe us when we told her there was something fairly benign but creepy in the building. We were sitting in the office. She scoffed and loudly said, "If there's anything in here, prove it." We all held our breath, kind of nervous, a bit scared but also curious. And just about the time my manager was getting that look on her face that said, "Ha, told you so," something was thrown out in the hallway. It took us several minutes to work up the courage before going to check and finding that a book that normally sat on a bookshelf near the front door had somehow gone from that bookshelf around the corner and halfway down the hallway. The manager never talked about it and quit shortly after that. I've since quit also, but last I heard they were still hearing voices and seeing shadows in the building.
So I was walking home from college one afternoon. It's about a 2-mile walk between home and college. I'm on the outskirts of the town center and entering a busy neighborhood, and everything seems normal until I start getting a creepy feeling, like I was being watched or something. So I look around and what do I find? Literally every person looking at me and watching me as I go past them. Even the people driving were looking at me as they went past. Like there was this one guy who was turning the corner to come onto the road I was about to cross. And he was legit leaning over in his seat, staring at me as he drive around this corner. Happened for the entire way home but hasn't happened since. Was super freaked out. Didn't tell my family or friends cause they would think I'm crazy. And y'all out there saying this world ain't a simulation.
At my old middle school, I would have volleyball practice twice a week in the evenings. My sisters, 2 years older and 5 years older, did the same thing at my age. I remember going to return the volleyballs upstairs for my coach one night into her classroom, which was 2 stories above the gym. I made it up the stairs and saw the door for the class across the hallway start to slowly open and a really bright light and smoke or something slowly drifting out, almost dancing. I booked it downstairs and waited a little bit until my coach could walk up with me. The door was shut like nothing happened. About 8 or so years later, I was talking with my sister, 2 years older than me, about what I saw, and I was half expecting her to think I was being crazy. I go into detail, telling her what it looked like, which classroom and door and everything. She wasn't responding to me, so I looked over at her for the first time in a couple minutes, and she was crying. She told me she saw the exact same thing too and could not go back upstairs alone ever again. She was relieved to finally find out that she wasn't making it up in her head or being crazy. We thought of all the possibilities of what it could be. Custodians cleaning with the lights on and maybe smoking? But nope. It was too bright for any normal lights in there and way too dark outside for it to be shining through any window. Plus, the custodians would always clean after school and before our practices. School was done by 2:30 and practice was always 6:30, 8:30. We have heard many other stories from other kids at the school who had after-school activities and would hear weird shit. Still creeps us both out to this day.
My grandpa lived in an extremely rural, undeveloped area in the 40s, 50s when this occurred. Every time he would walk to school in the early morning, it would be pitch black, especially in the winter. There was this huge, old, unoccupied house that he'd walk by each morning. And each morning, he'd see the entire house light up as if there were automatic lights, or someone inside flipping all the light switches. The thing was, it was an ancient house in which no one lived. But more important, IMO, electric lights in every room, weren't a widespread thing where he lived. Even in houses with living occupants. Another one, my dad, his two brothers and his parents, his father was the grandpa who walked by the haunted house, had their share of poverty at certain points in my dad's childhood, to the point where my grandpa ate shortening and cucumber sandwiches to save money, to the point where the family went fishing in the nearby lake so they could have dinner, which takes us into our next story. They were fishing for a good while with no bites. Suddenly, this random man appeared with a tiny fishing box set up right next to them and started to fish. My grandpa would always emphasize how small the fishing box was because he'd say the man took out a bucket, bait, tackle, etc. from it, like he was Mary Poppins. He very quickly pulled in a lot of fish. Then, according to my grandpa, he pulled out a big knife and a board. Cotton cleaned the fish, pulled out a big box, put the cleaned fish inside, gave the box to my grandpa, and just left. They never saw him again. My grandparents and my dad think it was Jesus. I don't know what my uncles think. I've never talked to them about it. Not sure of the veracity of these stories. But at least with the second one, there were 3 people who very earnestly told me the same story.
One day I was with my brother and we both walked out of the house and started walking down the street at about 11 to 12 p.m. All of a sudden, about 5 meters away from us, a woman in a white dress just straight up walked into the wall and disappeared. I had no clue to where she came from, and I didn't recognize who she was. I couldn't see her face, as we saw her from a side profile, but she had dark, long black hair. I was frozen still for about 2 to 3 seconds and then turned to my brother to ask him, and he just saw that. I looked over at him and he was also frozen and replied with a yeah. We both just walked immediately back into our house and decided not to go out that night. Apparently, a few other people on my street have seen something similar, but for me it was only that one time.